Hello and welcome along or welcome back to Future Now, the new podcast from global innovation platform and ED sister brand Springwise. Each month, we bring you the latest stories, conversations and insights from across the world of sustainable and climate innovation, the people, the projects and the big ideas shaping our collective future. So it's the week ending the 19th of December, and as we are tantalisingly close to the end of 2025, we're going to take a look back at the year that's just been for climate tech before looking ahead to what 2026 might have in store. So we'll be speaking to two experts who are absolutely steeped in the world of sustainable innovation, and they are James Byrne, who's a partner at leading European climate tech hub Sustainable Ventures.
And the last year or so, certainly given political changes, the rhetoric, people have toned it down. People have been more careful what they say because of the global political environment, but the scale of activity is pretty significant, and it's significant in places which are arguably vocally anti-climate. Places like Texas have massive scale deployments of things like solar and wind because it's the cheapest form of energy, so they do loads of it.
And Dr. Karim Bahu, Head of Innovation at Sister, which is Manchester's new innovation district.
If we could bring all of these different parties under one roof to collaborate, to network, to innovate together, that provides the best opportunity for those ideas to then ultimately be successful.
Plus, we'll be unveiling Springwise's 6 technologies for 2026, the sometimes undersung technology areas that we believe offer loads of potential in the coming year and beyond. Yes, hello and welcome to Future Now. I'm Matilda Cox, the content editor at Springwise, coming to you from our studio at the Springwise office in East Grinstead. So as ever, I'm joined by Springwise's commissioning editor, Matt Hempstead. So Matt, it's nearly the end of the year. What are some of your reflections on how things have gone for positive impact innovation in 2025?
Hi Matilda, as you said at the top of the show, it's nearly the festive season, and I hope you and all our listeners are looking forward to some well-earned rest and reflection.
Absolutely.
I know I'm ecstatic because I've got 16 days off this year, which is probably the most time off in one go I've had, certainly since COVID, so very excited about that. But to the point at hand, I think this year has been a nuanced one in the areas of innovation we cover. So at the political and policy level, it's certainly not been a vintage year, not a fine vintage. We've definitely seen a shift in the rhetoric around climate action in many parts of the world, not least in the US. And we're also speaking to you in the immediate aftermath of COP30, which, although not a complete disaster, was disappointing with no mention of fossil fuels in the final text, for example. However, I think there is a bit of a distinction growing now between the talk and the walk of sustainable innovation. The fact is that we now have a core set of climate technologies that are simply the best technologies available in key areas of the economy. These are being adopted by hard-nosed business people, regardless of any politics, which is something James Byrne talks about in our interview with him, which you'll hear shortly. And I think we need to cling on to that and not forget it. To flesh this out with some facts, in October, the International Energy Agency published its flagship Renewables 2025 report, which found that global renewable power capacity is set to double between now and 2030. That's the equivalent of adding the generation capacity of the EU, China and Japan combined, all from clean sources. So this is really important because we've spoken for many years now about the need to electrify everything to meet our climate goals. And this forecast at least suggests that the overall trajectory is in the right ballpark, although it does look like we will fall just slightly short of the COP28 goal of tripling renewable power capacity by the decade's end from the 2022 level. The IEA report was not universally positive. It points out the ongoing challenges in the offshore wind industry, for example, and it also highlights that many solar and wind developers are facing large financial losses despite the growth in capacity. However, there are also signs that the trajectory of the energy sector is resilient to these setbacks, with developers either maintaining or increasing their deployment targets despite those losses I just mentioned. The other thing I'd say about the energy story is that the massive decrease in the cost of solar power, which is now the cheapest energy source in most parts of the world, is a result of lots of incremental improvements. And there was actually a really fascinating paper published by MIT in August that listed out all the individual innovations, many of which were borrowed from other industries that have enabled the cost of solar panels to fall by over 99% since the 1970s. And the reason I say this is because we are now starting to see the same flurry of incremental innovation in other important clean technologies. So since September, we've been using an AI tool we've built ourselves to add new innovations to our database on a much larger scale than ever before, really. And one of my main takeaways from operating in this more systematic way has been just how much work is going into technologies like batteries, hydrogen electrolyzers, AI chips, and still, despite all the progress already made, solar cells. Every week we see loads of innovations in all the individual components that make up those systems, all the electrodes, electrolytes, membranes, etc., which makes me really hopeful that we'll start to see learning curves similar to those that we've already seen in solar across a lot of these different technologies. So that's my piece, trying to put the Springwise positive spin on it, as always. Yep. Matilda, you're much closer to the individual innovations than I am these days, so I've got to ask, what have been your 3 favourite innovations this year and why?
So this was a much harder question to answer than I was anticipating. So I was kind of getting lost in the database for a while, and even innovations that feel like in my head were beginning of the year, we only published in November. So it kind of just goes to show how quickly things move and how many different solutions we come across on a day-to-day basis. But to start, I'd say one of my favourite solutions that we featured this year is Cyclo or Cyclo. Don't know exactly how you pronounce it, but CICLO. And this technology, so basically it's targeting microplastic pollution at the source. One of the biggest sources of microplastic pollution in the oceans is from our clothes and from washing our clothes. And what Cyclo is, the technology, it's an ingredient that gets added to synthetic materials like polyester, like nylon, at the beginning of the fibre making process. And it basically creates these kind of holes or spots within the plastic itself that, and these gaps make it easier for naturally occurring microbes in the soil, in the sea, in landfills to kind of get in and start breaking down these materials into their basic natural elements, and it's safe for nature, and could be a really exciting solution to our enormous plastic problem. And then another one that really kind of sticks in my mind is Skeptic. So they're a UK startup, and with the kind of explosion of AI that we've seen this year, where it's become really, really mainstream, everyone's using it, there's much of the conversation has kind of rightly been about the environmental impact, as you touch on in your conversation with James in a bit. We've seen a lot of solutions that are kind of working to make AI more climate friendly, so kind of more efficient chips and things like that. But what Skeptic's doing is trying to make AI more socially responsible as well as environmentally. So basically they've created a browser extension designed for students, but what Skeptic is doing is making sure that we're using AI in a socially responsible way as well. So they've created a browser extension that's designed for students to help them engage with generative AI more thoughtfully and more responsibly. So they're not saying avoid using AI in education, but kind of learn how to do it in a way that's not making you kind of overly dependent on the technology. And then last but not least, so this is one we featured, I think it was only last week, but that's Nutripea's cheesable milk. So basically it's a milk replacement that ingredient that can then be turned into things like yogurts, cheeses, ice creams, but instead of using cow proteins, it's made using microbes and fermentation. So that means that the final products are much lower in carbon and are also free from lactose. And as a lactose intolerant sufferer myself, who's been burnt by many disappointing and questionable vegan cheeses over the years, yeah, I'd be keen to try this cheesable milk.
Absolutely. So they're all very inspiring innovations, and it's great to see so much creative work going on. I'd never thought of the phrase cheesable milk before. However, while we see a lot of innovation in our position at Springwise, it's frankly more interesting to hear from the people who are involved in the nitty-gritty of venture building and commercialisation, which is why we've enlisted our 2 guests today. So first up, I spoke to James Byrne, who's partner at Sustainable Ventures, who invest in startups but also provide a range of different support programs to help them scale and get off the ground. Here's that interview now. James, thanks very much for giving us your time today. Could you start by telling us what Sustainable Ventures does for startups?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for having me. So Sustainable Ventures is a growth partner for climate tech businesses. We started off by founding our own startups about 15 years ago. And we've now taken all of that experience of scaling those business as the founders and the managing teams to support other entrepreneurs. So we support over 1,000 startups over the years, and we do that primarily through three different approaches. So we invest just shy of 60 investments, and importantly have many more co-investors, about 200 institutions which we co-invest with and have follow investment from. We have physical incubation space, which we again created because we needed that. So as an example, our HQ in London, we have about 170 sustainable businesses co-located in the same space, which has some very significant agglomeration effects. And we run and provide expert services to support startups in partnership with the public sector and larger corporate organisations. So we run programmes for national, international governments, regional governments, local governments, and a range of programmes for corporates paid for by them.
Brilliant. So a lot of stuff that you do there, and you also mentioned, the breadth of companies you work with. They're all very different, but are there any kind of recurrent themes that you've heard from them this past year?
So they're in different areas. We only work with organisations that address climate change and resource scarcity, but we have a lot that will fall into buildings, energy, mobility, from kind of industry perspectives, and then kind of technology sets, a lot in energy systems, AI, materials. The feeling, the trends, the generalizations over the years. 15 years ago when we first set up, people did not want to talk to us about sustainability. I think when we got to the pandemic and the back end of that, you were certainly in a position where people were questioning where their food came from and their energy came from and how stuff got to their house. So that, along with a lot of aligned political leadership around the world, there was significant vocal advocacy for sustainability. I think in the background we were always very aware that no one's ever paid a green premium at scale, so therefore it always has to be founded in commercial reality, and it has to be competing against whatever other products are on the market. So I think to wind forward to today, and the last year or so, certainly given political changes, the rhetoric, people have toned it down, but the scale of activity is pretty significant. And it's significant in places which are, arguably vocally anti-climate. Places like Texas have massive scale deployments of things like solar and wind because it's the cheapest form of energy, and they don't care. It's the cheapest form of energy, so they do loads of it. So I think that's really the point, is people are being more careful what they say because of global political environment, but the reality is a lot of these technologies are not the best, and therefore a lot of it is being sold and invested in. So that's probably the biggest thing. So some of our companies struggle a bit more here and there, probably than previous years, but I think that's more reflective of the wider tech VC ecosystem rather than a sustainability thing. And then from a sustainability perspective, some are doing exceptionally well, probably just talking about it in a slightly different way than they might have done 12, 18 months ago.
So you, as part of what you do, you provide equity funding for companies, but you also, I saw that you help them apply for non-dilutive grants as well. What, in your opinion, is kind of the optimal role for these two capital sources in the context of climate innovation specifically?
So look, we do invest. We invest in about 8 to 10 companies a year at the pre-seed and seed stage. And we help in other ways, a much larger number of equity funding rounds and other types of funding rounds as the companies scale in terms of venture debt and other kind of asset funds where they're building things. So we form different roles in that. I think the blend of public and private is really interesting. So, certainly increasingly we're doing more and more programmatic activity around that, where we're combining two together at a UK government level, UKRI level. Growth is the mantra, and they're trying to use more of that public funding to leverage in significant amounts of private sector capital. And actually, there's targets against that there didn't used to be years ago, which is an important feature. When it comes to investment portfolio, we will be very conscious of organisations that only win grants and that's all they ever do, and they just continue to do that. But on the other hand, most of the businesses we work with, particularly given we focused on IP heavy investments, will attract, and a lot of those have physical assets rather than just software, will have a reasonable proportion of investment required from the public sector to get to the point that the private sector can. And it's not unusual, in fact it happens quite frequently, where we will we will invest alongside securing of a grant to make it possible for them to deliver that work, and they won't have the capital to do it otherwise. So that happens quite frequently, particularly because we invest very early. So yeah, there's no perfect ratio there. All the businesses are different, but we will, in the majority of cases, see a blend where those businesses are raising both to help them de-risk. And, as will always be the aspiration over time as they scale, it's more private sector finance than it is public.
Yeah, absolutely. So specifically with your investor hat on here, you talked about how, the environment has changed, the political environment certainly. What characteristics do you look for in, I suppose, business characteristics really do you look for in a climate tech startup? And has that changed with the changing environment over recent years? Are there things you now prioritise more than you maybe did 3, 4, 5 years ago? And has that evolved?
We certainly do more. We focus more on IP heavy businesses in recent years. We've always had it in the mix, more so than your average VC would have been. We're still one of the earliest and most active investors in the space, and our approach is really and always has been to focus on the founders, and we'll ask core questions. Does it make sense for this founder to build a company? Do we believe they have an advantage in the space? Is the time right for that opportunity? The sort of things that you might expect people to look at. Is it going to get a big return? And particularly when we're talking IP heavy, the nature of the founders is obviously quite often academic background. Often these things will work in a university environment. They'll work at an early stage in low numbers, but you've really got to focus on the unique economics. And can you get those down over time? Can you get not just the technology readiness level up, but also the manufacturing readiness level? Is it possible to make a lot of them? Is it possible to scale? And, when it is scaled, can it then compete with whatever's the dominant product in the market at the moment and overtake it? And we see a lot of good businesses, but quite often valuation might be too high for the point that we're at, and we'll have to turn it down. Or the market's too small, and therefore, you do the mathematics behind it, and it just doesn't work. It's one of the features of a VC fund versus others. The money is raised from people on the basis it is a business model in its own right, and there's a criteria by which that money is raised, and VC funds have to stick with their. It's one of the reasons why we have 200 co-investors in institutions, because even if something's not right for us, or we absolutely need people to follow on from us, it might be right for someone else, and we know who they are, and we build that kind of network effect. Investing is incredibly collegiate. It's not a competitive thing. Everybody needs everybody else.
And yeah, just on the founder point, because a lot of our listeners will be founders or aspiring founders. I've seen a few things in recent years about those kind of like co-founder matchmaking programs type things. In your experience of seeing so many companies, is there a good template for a match between two co-founders that you can share, or does it kind of really vary by the individuals?
Very, very good question. Obviously, we have been in. We've been in the shoes. We are also a private organisation and group, so we do live the complexities of building teams every day and scaling ourselves. So we're able to kind of leverage on. We don't invest in businesses where there's only a solo founder. We'll only do that where there's two or three. There are a number of reasons for that, but typically it's skill sets. You want complementary skill sets. The simplistic view is you want someone on the technical side and you want someone on the commercial side. It can be more nuanced than that. You might, have someone that's more on the finance in the mix as well as someone that can sell it and someone that can build it. There's different combinations there, but yeah, particularly where we invest, usually there'll be one of the founders that is the technical person. There are programs to help do that. Which have had some successes. It's quite a difficult and challenging model to actually run. Is the venture build model? We bear in mind the foundations of our business are a venture build model for ourselves, and our team has built venture build models in the past, so we're well aware about how they can and cannot work. It's a challenging model, but occasionally you can get a pretty good win out of them as well.
Brilliant. So we're coming to the end of 2025 now. So looking ahead to 2026, what are I could say 3, but it could be more or less, what are your top technology trends that you're expecting to see accelerate in the coming year?
always an interesting question to pose. We operate a lot in the real world compared to some tech areas. So some of the issues we're facing, you need to kind of solve both things. You look at the energy grid in the UK. I mean, just the sheer amount of money that needs to be invested into physically putting things in to allow for the amount of power that's coming online. But the question is, it can be a lot cheaper to be able to flexibly change the use of energy rather than putting stuff in the ground. So there are some really interesting businesses doing that. And if you look at the companies coming through in the UK that are now achieving real growth, quite a few of them are in that space. So the likes of Kraken Flex, which is being spun off from Octopus Energy and will probably be listed in 2026, I would imagine. That is worth more than Octopus itself because of the scalability of that and the value of that kind of software product to flex demand over 70 million homes now. So that's a really interesting area, and that's only going to grow in requirement as more and more energy comes onto the grid, particularly in the context of, we've talked about solar, but the production capabilities of China now is like each year is the total amount of installed, solar in existence. So just the sheer quantity of the stuff that's getting pumped out is mind-boggling in the trillions of investments. So that's certainly an interesting area, and energy underpins everything. It's one of the difficulties in the UK is our energy is expensive for lots of reasons, but we will need to invest more in that area. We do a lot of materials as well. Some really interesting stuff in the UK in materials, again, in the kind of physical world. People build things. Maybe we're a bit slow to build things in the UK in some ways, but we need to build them better. And we do a lot in retrofit of buildings with big partners to try and get more UK-based domestic materials companies to be able to scale up their innovations out. Quite often out of the universities, actually a lot of stuff that I'm sat around now is some of those innovations that we're kind of helping that journey. So I think sustainable materials is a really interesting area, and it's partly linked to the energy side of things. It'd be remiss to not mention AI. There's lots of different avenues to that. I think there's a lot of complexity there. There's huge amounts of investment going on. The thing to remember there is that the biggest issue that AI has moving forward is energy. So you can see huge, very polluting energy assets being built in deserts in the US, for example. So the ability to add more AI capability on moving forward will be determined about how much power we can get, electrical power can be produced, and the siting of those data centers is very interesting as well. In theory, close to the power would be better.
Brilliant. Well, as ever, we've ended up on AI, but I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks again for your time, James. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, there we had James Byrne from Sustainable Ventures, an organisation that has been in the sustainability game for a long time and has therefore seen the tide ebb and flow multiple times. So Matt, you ended up there talking about AI, as we often do. What do you make of it all?
Well, that's the $1 trillion question, isn't it? And of course, that's the unavoidable story at the moment. As James pointed out, a lot of this does ultimately come down to energy, and we have seen lots of different ways that innovators are looking to solve that problem, whether that's by optimizing cooling systems, using energy that would otherwise be wasted, or optimizing AI chips. Without adding too much hot air to what is already a much discussed topic, I think for me, some of the most interesting conversations we've had this year have been about the suitability of different machine learning architectures and techniques for particular applications. So the well-known consumer-facing generalist models that we're all familiar with by now, they follow a particular approach which is very data and compute heavy. However, we've spoken to innovators who are using very different techniques for use cases like industrial energy optimization. So we talked to Luffy AI and Digilab on ED's COP30 podcast just recently about this, for example, and that's been very interesting and eye-opening for me. The fact that there are many different ways to make an AI model and they're not all created equally. On top of that, while I think there is a real risk that AI takes all the oxygen out of the room when it comes to innovation funding, the IEA has pointed out that there are potential benefits to its use in the climate transition, in addition to highlighting its impacts. So it's important to bear that in mind as well. And someone else who has an opinion on AI and data centres, as well as loads of other areas of climate-related innovation, is Dr. Kareem Bahu, who is Head of Innovation at Sister, which is a brand new sort of innovation district, sort of physical facilities project based up in Manchester. So here's our conversation with him now.
Dr. Bahu, thanks so much for your time giving us today. Let's start at the very beginning. What is Sister?
Thanks very much for having me. So Sister is an innovation district in Manchester. And to me, what really stands out about the Sister proposition is the unique collaboration between the University of Manchester, which is a world-leading university, and Bruntwood SciTech, which is one of the most impressive property developers in the UK, backed by the Greater Manchester Pension Fund and Legal & General. So it's really a 15-year project that will see the former North Campus of the University of Manchester transformed into a 4 million square foot globally competitive innovation district that will really elevate Manchester's position as a national centre for science and technology. So Sister is driving investment and global players into Manchester, which we hope will create over 10,000 high-quality jobs, generating 1.5 billion in gross value added to Manchester.
Brilliant. And that collaboration with the university, how does that work? Where do they come into it? And how do you help to get their research out of the lab?
So we work closely with Unit M, which is launched recently, and Unit M is the front door to the innovation capability through the university. So we've got the likes of the Turing Innovation Catalyst, IBIC, the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre. So there's some really important strategic partners that we work closely with on a daily basis in order to try and understand what the next best ideas are and whether there's an opportunity to shape a company and have that company spin out of the university. We also work very closely with the Innovation Factory. So the Innovation Factory work with all of the spin-outs from the University of Manchester. And at Sister, we offer that workspace, the event space, and all of those collaboration opportunities that are needed in order to get all of these amazing ideas off the ground.
Yeah, brilliant. And that was my next follow-up question. What are the benefits of that specifically physical place-based innovation community? I mean, obviously everything's so online these days, but what are the benefits of having those facilities as you have at Sister?
So I fundamentally believe that the best ideas are developed through collaboration between organisations of all different shapes and sizes. And that the best discoveries are at the interface between different scientific and technological disciplines. So if we can bring all of these different parties under one roof to collaborate, to network, to innovate together, that provides the best opportunity for those ideas to then ultimately be successful. So Sister is an innovation district, as I mentioned, with the two important partners of ours through the University of Manchester and Bruntwood SciTech. And we have a wide network of partners all the way from investors to IP lawyers to accountants to all of the relative ingredients, if you like, in order to make sure that the companies that are based here have the best opportunity to grow and be successful.
So yeah, just to come in on that point, so are there any really good examples you have of where two innovators have collaborated nicely from sharing facilities and having that interaction in a physical space?
So I guess one partnership that I would love to highlight is our partnership with Venture Cafe Manchester. So Venture Cafe is a global brand based all the way from Boston through to Tokyo and Warsaw. And they decided to set up in the UK, starting first with London. And then there was a competitive selection process and they selected Manchester. And then through another selective process, selected Sister as the location for Venture Cafe Manchester. They launched just 2 months ago. And this provides a really good opportunity for organisations to collaborate and work together. So they have their flagship programme, which is what's called Thursday Gathering. And it's a meetup of technology enthusiasts, innovators. The launch event, we had over 300 people through the door. My role is to try and provide a platform for the organisations based here at Sister to showcase their technology and have others come and interact with it, ask questions. They may be investors, they may be potential collaborators, potential customers. So having that partnership with Venture Cafe has been a really great opportunity for businesses based here at Sister.
Brilliant. So we're here towards the end of the year now. So thinking about the year that's just been, what are the biggest news stories that have affected the startup ecosystem, both at home for you in Manchester, but also beyond?
So one of the biggest stories and one of the biggest splashes that came from the UK government was around the industrial strategy. So this was a really important and a big moment for businesses this year, outlining the plans to support high growth sectors to try and boost regional development as well. So inside the industrial strategy, the government outlined plans to help startups scale, and the real focus there was around growth. So there was an announcement for the development of what's called the Northern Arc, which was noted that northern cities are strategic destinations to pilot SME development, and that would be rolled out across the UK. Manchester was recognised as one of those 6 key city regions, and in turn will be receiving funding commitments from the British Business Bank as part of the industrial strategy. So that was one of the biggest announcements that we saw this year.
Brilliant. And do you think there's more that could be done to kind of support startups in your area, or what would be any further things that could unlock further progress?
So one of the real challenges for startups is not just access to funding, but access to long-term patient capital. And that's needed in order to provide that maximum opportunity to scale. So it's all well and good funding a project for 3 months, 6 months, even a year, when many of these technologies might take 5 or 10 years to come to fruition. I mean, let's take AI, for example. It was being talked about in the 40s, the 50s. People started to get interested a bit for the 60s. Then it was what was called the AI winter, where people were disillusioned maybe that AI would come to commercialization and we would see the benefits that many thought that we would. But it wasn't until the last decade that we actually then saw some of these technologies reach the market. People were starting to get excited about AI and what the impacts and what the opportunities would be. But that took a long time to get to that point. The same is true for many other technologies, quantum computing, for synthetic biology. Many of these technologies will require long-term patient investment in order to allow them to reach their potential. My ask would be that not only investors, UK government, but all the parties that are involved, and we all share the common interest in trying to advance the UK's economy, to receive the benefits of some of these technologies, but sometimes it does take time, and that long-term approach is really needed.
And have you seen much change in that over recent years? Are we seeing a change in the kind of outlooks for investors?
Yes, I do believe there are changes to attitudes, particularly around risk. And I think this is one area that is really in focus at the moment for investors. Historically, traditionally, the UK has been a much more conservative investment landscape, whereas if we go across the pond and we look at the United States, there is a much higher risk appetite, which means that companies with just an idea, without even an MVP, they'll have millions of pounds thrown their direction. But sometimes that's what's needed in order to get these projects off the ground. In the UK, we are changing that, I believe, and there is an increased risk appetite for investors. But also, if we think of ARIA, so the Advanced Research Invention Agency, their remit is to try and fund and get some of these moonshot projects off the ground. And I would love to see more of that type of activity going on.
Brilliant. So looking ahead to 2026 now, what are, I could say top 3, but it doesn't have to be 3 if you think there's more or any fewer that stand out even more than that. But what are the kind of main technology trends that you expect to accelerate in relation to net zero in the coming year?
So one area that I have a personal connection to that I was really pleased to receive the Nobel Prize for Chemistry this year was metal organic frameworks. So I remember studying for my PhD at Imperial College London, and we shared an office with the research group led by Professor Paul Lickis, who was one of the early pioneers of MOF chemistry. And back then, new applications were being explored, including carbon capture and storage. But one of the biggest challenges was about making those materials in an affordable way, designing those synthetic routes that were reliable, were reproducible. If we fast forward to today, the price has come down significantly and it costs as little as a few pounds per kilogram for these materials, where previously it would have been tens of thousands. I remember some of my old colleagues spending months just to make a fraction of a gram of new material. So now we can afford it. We can afford to commercialize these technologies, and they have immense opportunity for carbon capture, for storage and transportation of those gases. But I think some really niche and exciting applications where MOFs are being used as molecular sieves, so you can separate out methane from other gases using these materials. And that has a huge impact on the emissions from, for example, cattle farming, which is a large emitter of methane, which is a greenhouse gas 10 times as potent as carbon dioxide. So using these materials as sieves to collect and store that methane and potentially generate some energy from that methane too, but at the very least take it out of the atmosphere is a really amazing opportunity.
Fantastic. Yeah, we actually did a technology briefing on Springwise about MOFs. So I got a little insight in the interviews I did into that world. I think it's amazing. Beyond MOFs, are there any others you would highlight?
Another one that I think is really high on the agenda is data centers. So we've mentioned AI already, but in order to build these models, they're very data hungry, they're very power hungry, they require a lot of compute. So in order to ensure that the UK does not fall behind in a global context, and in order to ensure that we have that sovereign infrastructure here in the UK, we will need to build lots and lots and lots of data centers. Now, data centers, as I'm sure you're aware, require a lot of energy to power them. And that puts pressure on energy prices, on grid capacity, and we need to find that energy from somewhere. One of the areas that I think is really exciting, and again, it's an area I have a personal connection to working in the nuclear sector. I actually did spend some time in working on projects relating to nuclear decommissioning. So that's one thing to think about, is how to process the waste. But small modular reactors are one of the technologies being developed and put forward as a solution to some of the challenges around powering these data centers. So companies such as Rolls-Royce, which incidentally was a company founded in Manchester, now headquartered in Derby. So these reactors are a source of clean energy to power data centers, which would reduce some of the challenges around energy distribution because they could be located close to the sites that they're needed. And additional benefits may include cost, although they're expensive to put in the research and development time. But the unit cost for the electricity is predicted to be lower than other sources. Construction time is significantly reduced versus large nuclear power stations. Improved safety and improved operational flexibility as well. So I think small modular reactors may be a potential solution to some of the challenges around powering some of these very hungry data centers.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a good note on which to finish today. Thank you once again for your time, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much to Dr. Karim Bahu from Sister. Matt, I believe you now have a game for us to play for the final segment. Dare I ask what it is?
Well, I do indeed, but don't be too scared. So to kind of put a bit of background to this, so for the past 6 months, we've been speaking to a load of different academics and founders about different fundamental technologies that crop up in our database again and again and again. Some of these are well known, but not all of them. And what we've been doing is distilling the insights of those experts down into monthly technology briefings, which are available exclusively to our Springwise members. Now, given it's the end of the year, we've pulled them all together into a report, which we've called 6 Technologies for 2026. I mean, I guess that means next year we'll have to do 7 technologies for 2027. We'll have to see. But this will either be out already or it will soon be coming out, depending on exactly when you're listening to the podcast. So to give us a little bit of a quote unquote fun challenge, I thought we could take it in turns to give a quick fire explanation of each of these technologies in just 30 seconds, which I timed on the train this morning and it isn't very long. So it is a challenge. One of those technologies was MOFs, which Dr. Bahu has already talked about in his interview. technology, so we'll skip that one, you'll be pleased to know. So why don't you, Matilda, take mycelium and aerogels, and I'll take radiative cooling, perovskites and biochar.
Okay.
It's my go first, so I think that's only fair, as I sprung this on you. So I'll start with radiative cooling, and you're going to time me and jump in when I'm out of time. And we haven't really recorded or practiced this in advance, so this could be a complete disaster.
Okay, right. I will count you in. I'll get the timer up. Right, 3, 2, 1, go.
So radiative cooling is the natural process by which the Earth keeps itself cool. So essentially it emits radiation with very specific wavelengths within the electromagnetic spectrum out into space through what's called the atmospheric window. And innovators are basically hacking this natural phenomenon by creating materials that both reflect incoming sunlight, that stop an object like a building from heating up in the first place, but also emit heat in that atmospheric window out into space. So what you get is an energy-free cooling system, which you can call batteries.
Hey, time.
Oh, okay.
Oh God, and that
nearly got
well.
there. Nearly got there. Right. So you're up next, and you're going to take one of my personal favourites, which is mycelium.
Fan favourite.
It is a fan favourite at Springwise. So I'm going to get started now and count you in. So 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so mycelium is the root-like structure that grows under a fungus or a mushroom. So out in nature, that's under the soil. To begin with, it's invisible to the eye, but it kind of keeps growing, and basically what it's doing is breaking down plant nutrients and connecting these soil ecosystems. And outside of nature, it's really good for things like packaging, clothes, building materials, alt meats.
And that's your time. I felt a bit bad doing a very
abrupt ending.
Loud, abrupt alarm, seeing as I sprung this on you. So it's me now, and I'm up with biochar.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, biochar is a carbon-rich material that's made by heating different organic waste streams, such as farm waste, in an environment with very low amounts of oxygen. It basically creates a material that, for very complicated chemistry reasons, stores carbon in a very sort of stable, locked-up way, whereas organic waste would normally break down very quickly in the environment and release CO2. For that reason, biochar is very important in carbon removal and sequestration, but it's also a useful material in itself. It has properties like high porosity, that mean you can use it in things like battery materials.
Time. Very good.
It really does go quickly, doesn't it?
My heart is pounding.
Yeah. So next up, you have aerogels, Matilda.
Okay.
And this is one you were involved in making the technology briefing, so I thought this might be a helpful one for you to do. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so aerogels, despite the name, they're not actually gels. So they're made up of a solid network, or a network of kind of solid material. They're porous, but in between this kind of solid network, it's air. It's not full of liquid. So that makes them really, really light, and also really insulating. So they trap and block liquids, heat, sound. So that makes them really powerful, like building insulators. And they're also known as frozen smoke.
Very good. Well, the last one now, so up next is perovskites, I think.
Yeah, right. 3, 2, 1.
So perovskites are another category of material that have a very specific crystal structure, which makes them very good at absorbing light, and that means they're very useful in light-related applications, most notably solar power. The reason why we're excited about perovskites when we already have silicon panels is because in a very short space of time, researchers in the lab have been able to create perovskites with very high power conversion efficiency, which means they're very good at converting a lot of the energy in the sunbeam into power. They also can be combined with flexible substrates in order to create light and flexible panels that can be added to a range of different surfaces in the built environment.
Perfect. Time. Flawless. Okay. So that was a real tongue twister, Matt. So thank you for that. But obviously, you can't explain those technologies fully in that short a space of time. So if you want to find out more about those technologies and what they can be used for, read the 6 Technologies for 2026 report, or better still, become a Springwise member and you'll be able to access all of our past technology briefings. So that's a wrap from Future Now in 2025. Join us again in the new year, where we'll begin by talking about the latest trends in startup funding and how we can close the climate funding gap. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me too. Wishing everyone a happy holidays and a restful time off. See you in 2026.